I know what you're thinking. I thought this video was about Black Canary. It is. But this is our base figure to start the project. This Superwoman figure is an excellent base figure for many characters. I can only choose one at a time, so I've chosen Black Canary in this instance. And the figure itself lends itself not only to be taken apart easily, but to be worked on this particular character easily. So I'll give you a parts list at the end of the video so you understand exactly where all of these parts came from. But I want you to see our base starting piece. And yes, she's not the most attractive and she's not the best articulated, but she does have all the parts needed for the next character that we have in mind, and that's Black Canary. Now, this is our initial start. This is a head sculpt from Black Canary DC Direct, and this was a long time ago when this was released. I've kept it ever since. I don't have the other parts of the actual figure, as again, they are brittle, they became just poor plastic, or they just became gummy, and I got rid of it. But I kept the head sculpt. I got rid of a lot of the other stuff. Now, this base body lends itself really well for this size head sculpt. And let's get started and let me show you what I came up with in the process of making this figure, you can say, from scratch. So let's take a quick overview of what we need to do on this body. And yes, I did borrow some shoes from Joker from the Dark Knight Returns. We will have to shave off a few of those straps that are around each leg. I did borrow the hands from Batwoman Beyond, and I did tear off or remove that tail, well, it looks like a cape. And I did also mark out where I want to cut the corset. And using a sharp X-Acto knife, I followed the lines that I drew in there. Removing this, you end up noticing that it's nothing more than a plug. And of course, you do cut it off at the collar. The collar's already there for you. Fill in the gap, make sure there are no seams visible. When you pull a corset down, you find that it's another plug. So you can't modify the chest itself, it's already done for you, and that just makes it less work for you to do. You will have to modify the head to use the same neck peg from the other figure. That just makes it a lot easier. Before we start on anything else, this is what we're going to start on first, and that's the legs. So with a sharp X-Acto knife, you're going to remove 4 of those straps that go around each leg or the calves. Now very carefully, placing the knife flat against the surface and cutting away from you, you're only going to cut that one strap. Do not cut under the surface. You want to cut above the surface. So you will start on one side and then you'll actually flip the leg to the other side or upside down. And you'll cut away from you again and cut the ridge from the other side. Now, why are we not using a Dremel? Because it's a lot harder with a Dremel to stay on such a small line and not damage the rest of the plastic. Even if you're going at a small rate of speed or slow rate of speed, you are very prone to fall off this edge and then ruin the plastic that's around it, thereby causing you to do more standing, more work, and it's just not going to be worth it. Why? Well, for one, you really only need to do enough here to sand it because all of this is going to be under the boot. It's not going to be seen. You don't even have to paint this. And why only remove 4? Well, because the other straps will help us to create the folds that we need in the boot and make it more realistic. So work smarter, don't work harder. Now we're still working on the legs, but this time we're working on the boots. And I did some research to find out how these captain's boots are made, or you call them buccaneer boots, and they're actually two pieces. So that's what we have to do to make this look correct. We need two pieces. We need a bottom boot sleeve and we need a top sleeve that will fold over. Now, this bottom piece that I'm sewing here is very, very small. It is made of pleather and you will have to turn it inside out to sew it. And if you take a look here, it is nothing more than a odd-shaped triangle or cylinder. So you'll have to cut as close to that seam that you sewn in there and then turn it inside out again, or right side out. Now, make sure you burn off those edges or those threads so that they don't unravel. Just cutting them is not going to be enough. So you'll have to singe those as best as possible. Now, I'm only showing you a small clip here, but it took me 4 attempts to get it right. Now once you have your boot sleeve ready, you can turn it inside out, and now you can make a test fit to see if it's going to work. And it should be a tight fit. Now, later on in the video, I'll show you a better technique for actually applying this. What I'm doing here is my first attempt, and yeah, I am having some trouble doing so because it is so tight on such a small piece. But it has to be tight so that it has the proper look. As you can tell, we still haven't done any painting to the legs. We did a test fit now with the shoe, and that sleeve covers that ball joint, which is great, and the shoe fits nicely. It is a bit loose, so if you want to add a small bit of glue that is like the Fabri-Tac glue, it should work even better for you. Do not use super glue because then they'll be in there permanently. So now that you've made matching sleeves or boot sleeves for the legs, it's time to make that cuff that goes over the boot. And that's a separate piece. Again, you still have to turn it inside out, make a seam, and this time it'll be a slightly bit wider and bigger because it goes actually over the calf. And this is where you need to decide how much of it you want to cover. If you want a large cuff or a small cuff. I prefer the larger one because then I can always pull it up and down to size it according to what I need. And this cuff fits inside that sleeve, so there's no need to glue or sew these together. It's going to be held in by pressure from the bottom sleeve, and that's going to make it easier. Now you see why we didn't cut the other straps on the legs. They're well covered by the sleeve and the actual cuff. So let's dive into some paint, especially flesh tones. And if you want to know how to mix these colors, I do have another video, which is prior to this, showing you how to mix the flesh tones. Now, this case or this part of the video is totally optional. You don't have to paint the legs. I didn't realize that at the time because I totally forgot about the fishnets. But once you put in those fishnet stockings, especially the tight woven ones, you're not going to see the paint work. you'll have to use the larger fishnets to be able to see the paint that you did. And keep in mind that those fishnets do stain the surface of the paint. So make sure that you are gonna want to paint this before you put the fishnets on. You may want to wash the material before you do so. The same thing with the arms. If you do not want to use a jacket with your Black Canary, then it's okay to paint the arms. But if you're going with the painted jacket, which is what I will show you on my version, you will have to decide if you're going to paint the shoulders or not. Now, you do have to pull the corset down to paint the actual figure. The back of the body is not going to show. It's going to be covered by a jacket. And I only molded part of the chest, which is what is only going to show once you have the corset up. So you really only have to paint the chest itself. Now the sides, it won't show either. There'll be a jacket. Now I fully painted the legs, as you can see here. I love the tone that worked out. I just was really happy with it. It's time to add some fishnet stockings. Now, as mentioned before, I was going to show you a better technique to slide that boot on. It's best to just twist it on. And this is because it's not painted at the bottom, only painted at the top. Twist it on as far as you can take it up into the thigh, actually the calves. Make sure the seam is at the back of the calf. Make sure the bottom edge still covers that ball peg and that the shoe still fits. And then of course, once you have this on, then you can add the cuff that goes at the top. But we're going to be working with this fishnet. So this I bought off of eBay. It cost me 12 bucks and it was a mistake because it's too small and it's sewn at the bottom, which means I have to cut it because it has a toe sewn into it, and it's sewn two pieces together. This figure can't take it. It's got to be cut in half, and unfortunately it's only enough material after I cut it to cover one leg. So I had to order more material and just make my own. But this is what your result should look like if you're going to go that route. You'd have to order two pieces to cover both legs. It's going to cost you $24. No. So I went ahead and ordered more material to have matching fishnet stockings. And I went ahead and changed the settings on my sewing machine. I went with a zigzag, a small zigzag. You can tell from the settings here on the machine. And then I made a seam. I made a small tube that was a correct size for the figure I'm using. So I started off small on one edge, narrow, and went larger and wider toward the other edge. And as you can see here, I made it larger so that I can actually have enough material to stretch it over the leg. Now it is open at both ends. I sewn a seam at the top and at the bottom. Why? Because I don't want it to tear as I pull the material. It has to be a tight fit, but not tight that you can't have poses. Now, here's what you need to do once you've got the fishnet over the leg. And again, you're not going to see your paint work. So if you didn't paint it, don't worry about it. Well, you're going to have to now fix it to the edge at the top of the leg. Don't glue the bottom. You don't have to because it's going to be held in by that boot sleeve. But the top you do have to glue down. And I used super glue Loctite. This stuff is great because it's a gel, so there's no spilling. Now, keep in mind you do have to wait for it to dry before you handle the figure. So you just want to tap the very edge where the fabric meets the edge of that piece. At the top and then at the edges and at the bottom. These are going to be all the pieces or edges that would be otherwise visible if you make extreme poses. But you don't want it to fray and you don't want it to come off while you're making those extreme poses. Now the surplus here, either you can tuck into the actual groove that's in the actual joint, or you can cut it. Myself, I prefer to cut it. I don't want excess material. I don't want any obstructions when I'm making those poses with these figures. Now, you do have a material covering the opening to the peg. And you do want to cut that away so your peg can go in properly and not become overly tight. And you can do this once it's drying or once it's fully dry. Either way, you'll have to cut it, and this glue goes pretty quick, so it will actually hold as you're doing all the work. Do the same for the opposite leg. So now all of your practice of putting these boot sleeves on comes into play. Remember that the bottom is not glued. You can glue it if you want, but you gotta make sure it's fully dry before you do this. Since I did not glue it, I just have to be careful that I don't twist the fabric underneath it in an opposite direction. I still wanna twist and slide that boot sleeve as far as I can take it up onto the calves. Then I will fold down the top lip of it and then bring in over that boot sleeve that goes on the top. And then I can bring in this bottom sleeve and lock it into place. But as you can tell, this is going to hold both the fishnet and that boot sleeve cuff at the top. It'll take you a few minutes to get this into place because it's a little tricky and they are tight and it is a small figure. And at the same time, well, it's not a race. You just want to be accurate. You can then attach it to the bottom part of the torso and then see how the boots are going to look with the bottom sleeve already attached. Now, once again, you can actually add the Fabri-Tac glue on the inside to make it a bit thicker of a connection so that the boots can stay on solid and you can still have articulation. And as you can see at this point, they're not painted yet because we're still handling them, making test fits. But for now, this is what it's going to look like. Take a look. Keep in mind that we still have a ways to go. Not only do we have to paint the shoes, but we also have to make or find a jacket for her. Now in this case, the cuffs that are on the gloves, I made those the same way I made the boot cuffs. They're just a lot smaller, and yeah, I had to turn those inside out as well so you can have the same look. And they're made from the same material, so we have a matching set of accessories. But now, let's go on to the rest, and that's the jacket. And I had a hard time finding a jacket. I wanted the one from the Drown, but it's too small. So I ended up with the Redhood jacket from the first figure. And let me show you what I did to make it fit. Now the jacket itself is the correct size. It fits great, even with that hair that has no mobility. But we can't use the arms from Red Hood. We need to use the arms from Superwoman. In this case, they're going to be Black Canaries. So you need a nice, new, sharp X-Acto blade. We're going to cut off the arm on her. We're going to cut off the arm where the peg is on the Red Hood arms. And we're going to join them together. Let me show you. Just above the articulation for the pin is where you want to cut. And be careful, because if you go too close to that pin, you're going to cut into that articulation piece that swivels. But look, it fits great inside the sleeve. Now, this pin right here on the Red Hood arm, we need that with the surface it's on, so we have enough surface to glue. If we only cut the pin, we don't have enough surface to glue it on, and it's going to be a weak point. And take a look. Now we have two flat surfaces we can join with some glue. It's awesome. What's interesting is that these pieces are both configured to each side of the sleeve. So I'm glad that I cut it just underneath the peg. Now, this is not going to be sufficient enough to create a strong joint. We need to go one step further, and that is to create a peg that joins them both. So I took some styrene, drilled into the peg that is going into the actual shoulder, and one into the arm that I'm going to join in. And if you're going to drill that peg, again, be careful you don't drill into the joint that makes that swivel. If you do, you'll have to take it apart and drill on the inside, Dremel it out so that it still swivels freely, and then super glue it together. By doing this, you'll have full articulation of the arm, and you'll be able to make those poses that are dynamic while holding those accessories. This is what the arms should look like before you start painting them. This is what it looks like painted in black. And yes, this is what it looks like painted in blue. I really like the blue. So we have now completed this project, and I'm going to leave you with some before and after videos so that you can fully understand where we started. And yes, I'll leave you a parts list at the end. Here's our base figure to begin with. Who knew that we would start out with this and end up with what's on the right? And I did receive a few comments saying that I shouldn't even attempt this figure because it was not worth my time. I really like the figure. I think it was worth my time. So much worth my time that I'm sharing it with you. This is the base head that we started with, one that I kept for many years, and I'm glad I did because it finally took shape with this actual figure that comes from Mcfarlane. And now, if you want to see the comparison between the black and the blue jacket, I still like the blue jacket that much more. Now again, you can choose what version of the character you want to make. I just chose the more classic one because that's what I grew up with. But if you grew up with a more recent version, it's all up to you what you want to do. Now you know how to do it. So I don't do action figure reviews, that's just not my thing. I prefer to create figures. Now, somebody did ask for a comparison in scale. Here's what she scales like with some of her counterparts. Again, I'm not going to show you all of the figures because that's not my deal. You'll have to go to another channel for that. But yes, her height is increased because of the boots. But I'm not here for height-wise. I'm here for the character. And I'll leave you now with some ending video of the actual piece. I hope that you liked the video and that you learned something today. Again, if this is your first time, thank you for stopping by. If you are a returning visitor, thank you so much. Help me push that channel to 5,000 subscribers. I've got something else to give away once we reach 5,000 subscribers. In the meantime, I hope this video gives you plenty of ideas to work on your Mcfarlane figures or other figures that you may have. We'll see you next time.